Have you ever stopped to wonder if your partner has truly felt the deepest levels of pleasure with you? Here is the shocking truth. Surveys reveal that more than half of women admit to faking an orgasm at least once in their lives. They do it not because they don't love their partner, but because they don't want to hurt his feelings. Gentlemen, that means for decades, many men have been living with a quiet illusion, believing they were giving satisfaction when in reality, the experience was incomplete. My name is Dr. Mohit Khera. I am a urologist and men's health specialist, and for over 30 years I have dedicated my career to helping men, especially those over 60, reclaim their confidence, improve their relationships, and understand the real science of sexual health. I speak to you not just as a doctor, but as someone who has walked alongside thousands of men facing the same questions you have today. Here's the paradox that few men ever realize. It doesn't matter how much stamina you have, or even the size of your erection. For nearly 80% of women, penetration alone will never be enough to reach orgasm. It is not your fault, and it is not hers. It is simply biology. The good news is this. Once you understand the body's true design, there is a simple and powerful trick you can use. It's a sequence based on female anatomy that can unlock a kind of pleasure your partner may never have fully experienced. And in this video, I am going to show you exactly how it works, the Urologist's trick that transforms intimacy step by step. Stay with me, because what you are about to learn may change your relationship forever. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another men's health lesson designed especially for you. And if this message speaks to you, drop a 1 in the comments. If you feel I can do better, type 0 so I know how to improve and serve you better. Now let's begin with the very first and most important truth about female pleasure. Too many men overlook it, yet it is the foundation of every real orgasm a woman experiences. I'm talking about the clitoris, the true center of her sexual response and the key to her satisfaction. 1. The clitoris, the true center of female pleasure. Gentlemen, if there is one thing I want you to take away today, it is this. The clitoris is the absolute heart of female pleasure. I cannot emphasize this enough. Over the course of my 30 years as a urologist, I have had countless conversations with men who love their partners deeply, who care about their wives, and who truly want to give them satisfaction. Yet many of these men, despite years or even decades of intimacy, have overlooked or misunderstood this tiny organ that holds the greatest key to her pleasure. And I understand why. It is not something most of us were ever taught when we were younger. Many of you came of age in a time when talking openly about sex was almost taboo, and real education about female anatomy was rare. So for years, men relied on guesswork, and women often stayed silent to protect feelings. That silence created a painful gap, and for many couples, it still exists today. Now, here's the truth that may surprise you. What you see on the outside, the small nub just above the vaginal opening, is only the tip of the iceberg. Internally, the clitoris extends like the roots of a tree, branching into structures that surround the vaginal canal. It is a network of erectile tissue that becomes engorged with blood during arousal, just like the penis. But here is the staggering difference. The clitoris contains over 8,000 nerve endings. That is more than double the number found in the head of the penis. Let that sink in for a moment. Think of how sensitive you are at the tip of your penis, and now imagine something with twice the number of nerve endings, twice the sensitivity. That is the clitoris. This is why it is the most sensitive erogenous zone in the human body. It is not an opinion, it is not speculation, it is biology. And yet, for generations, this crucial truth was ignored. Men believed that penetration alone would be enough, and women went along with it because they did not want to bruise their partner's pride. The result? Many women never reached climax during intercourse, or they pretended to. I have had older patients, men in their 60s and 70s, sit across from me in my office with shock in their eyes as they finally understood that their wives had faked pleasure for years. It is a painful realization, but it is also a chance to change. It is never too late to learn, to adapt, and to become the kind of partner who truly knows how to bring joy. So how do you begin? With focus, with patience, and with intention. At the beginning of intimacy, the clitoris responds best to gentle, touch. Too much pressure too soon can overwhelm or even cause discomfort. Think of it like starting a fire. You don't throw heavy logs onto a small flame. You begin with a spark, then add kindling, and slowly build the heat. As her arousal grows, her body changes. Blood flow increases, tissues swell, and sensitivity heightens. That is when you can gradually increase the pressure or speed, but never forget that it is her signals, her breath, her body language, her words that guide the way. In all my years of practice, I have seen time and again that men who take the time to learn this simple truth about the clitoris transform their relationships. Their wives smile more, touch them more, and reconnect with them in ways they thought were lost with age. This isn't just about sex, it's about restoring intimacy, about giving your partner a gift she may have been waiting her entire life to receive. And here's the beautiful part. When she feels truly satisfied, when she knows her pleasure is your priority, her desire for you often comes alive again. Passion, even in your 60s or 70s, can feel as strong as it did in your 20s, maybe even stronger, because now it's built on wisdom and generosity. Gentlemen, the clitoris is not just an organ, it is the gateway. It is the first and most vital step in helping a woman reach her climax. If you skip it, you are missing the very key to her satisfaction. If you honor it, you open the door to connection you may never have thought possible. But remember, the clitoris is only the beginning of the journey. There is another, deeper, more mysterious source of pleasure hidden inside her body, one that many men have heard of but few truly understand. And once you discover how to unlock it, the experience can change everything. So let's move now to the second truth you need to know, the G-spot. 2. The G-spot. A deeper, mysterious zone of pleasure. For many years, the G-spot was spoken about almost like a myth, a secret whispered between women or dismissed entirely by doctors who claimed it didn't exist. I can tell you from both the science and from the stories of countless couples I've counseled that the G-spot is very real. And when you understand how it works, you gain access to a deeper, more profound kind of pleasure that most men, and even many women, have never truly experienced. Let me paint the picture clearly. The G-spot is not a button you press, but an area of tissue located inside the vaginal canal on the upper wall, just a couple of inches in. If you imagine the vagina as a clock face with the clitoris at 12 o'clock on the outside, the G-spot lies at 12 o'clock on the inside. When you touch it, you'll notice that it feels different than the smooth walls around it. It has a slightly ridged or spongy texture. And here's where many men make their first mistake. They try to stroke it lightly, as though it responds the same way the clitoris does. But the G-spot is unique. It reacts best to firm, steady pressure, often with that "come here" motion of the fingers. When stimulated correctly, it begins to swell with blood, becoming more distinct to the touch, and her response changes. The pleasure she feels here is different than the sharp, electric sensation of the clitoris. It is deeper, more internal, like a wave building from inside. Some women describe it as a fullness, a throbbing sensation, or even a pressure that transforms into ecstasy once arousal is high enough. In some cases, this stimulation can even lead to female ejaculation, which is a natural and powerful release that very few couples ever experience because they never knew how to approach this hidden source of pleasure. But here is something important, something I've seen repeatedly in my years of listening to women describe their intimate lives. If you rush to the G-spot too soon, if her body is not yet aroused, what she feels may not be pleasurable at all. In fact, it can feel uncomfortable, even like the urge to urinate. Many men have tried to touch this area without proper preparation and were confused or discouraged when their partner pulled away. The truth is, the G-spot is not meant to be awakened alone. It is like a locked room. It requires the key of clitoral stimulation to open it. Only when blood has flowed through her entire genital region, only when her body is alive with desire, will the G-spot reveal its full potential. I'll never forget a patient of mine, a gentleman in his late 60s, who came to me feeling frustrated. He and his wife had been married for over 40 years, but he admitted that she often seemed uninterested in intimacy. He wanted to reconnect with her, but he didn't know how. After learning about the sequence, focusing on clitoral arousal first, and then gently exploring the G-spot when she was fully engaged, he returned to my office a different man. With a quiet smile, he said, "Doctor, it was like she woke up. It was like I had discovered a part of her I never knew existed." That discovery changed their marriage, not just physically, but emotionally. Because when a woman feels that her partner knows her body, truly understands what brings her joy, the intimacy deepens in ways that touch every part of life. Gentlemen, the G-spot is not a myth. It is a deeper, mysterious zone of pleasure that has been overlooked for too long. When you take the time to learn how to approach it, patiently, respectfully, and in the right order, you unlock sensations that can transform your partner's experience. And yet, knowing about the G-spot is not enough. The real secret lies in how you connect it with the clitoris, how you blend the two sources of pleasure into something even greater. That is the trick most men never learn, but it is the very key that can elevate intimacy to a whole new level. So let's talk now about the sequence, the urologist's trick that ties it all together. 3. The urologist's trick, the correct sequence. Now that we've spoken about the clitoris and the G-spot separately, I want to reveal to you the real secret, the piece most men never put together. Over my years of practice, I have seen countless men feel frustrated because they knew about the clitoris, they had heard about the G-spot, but they didn't understand how these two fit together. They treated them as separate destinations, when in fact, the true magic lies in the sequence, the way one prepares the body for the other. This is what I call the urologist's trick, and it is simple, yet profoundly effective. Think of it this way. The clitoris is the key, and the G-spot is a locked door. You cannot open that door by force, and you cannot reach the treasures behind it by skipping steps. The only way to unlock that door is to use the key first, and that means beginning with the clitoris, giving it the time and attention it deserves. This is where so many men fail, not out of neglect, but out of eagerness. They rush, they skip, they think that intercourse or quick penetration will do the job. But when you do that, you are trying to force a lock that isn't ready to open, and what she feels will not be pleasure. It will be frustration or discomfort. Instead, picture yourself as guiding her body through stages. At first, the clitoris requires gentle stimulation, your hand, your mouth, even a toy if that's comfortable for both of you. The goal here is not to race toward orgasm, but to build arousal. As her body responds, blood begins to flow not just to the external clitoris, but to the entire internal network, including the G-spot. This swelling changes everything. It primes her body, it heightens sensitivity, it transforms what once might have felt like pressure or even the urge to urinate into something electrifying. I remember speaking with a man in his early 70s, married for nearly 5 decades. He admitted to me that his wife had never seemed to enjoy intimacy the way he hoped she would. I taught him about this sequence, how to focus first on the clitoris until his wife was nearly trembling with arousal, and then, only then, bring his fingers to her G-spot with that firm, steady motion. When I saw him a month later, his eyes were shining. He told me, "Doctor, it was like the floodgates opened. She held me afterward and said she felt more connected to me than she had in years." That is the power of the sequence. It is not a trick in the sense of manipulation. It is knowledge, applied with care, that allows her body to respond the way it was designed to. And when you bring these two sources of pleasure together, clitoral stimulation followed by G-spot pressure, the results can be extraordinary. Many women describe what's called a blended orgasm, a combination that is more powerful, more all-encompassing than anything they've experienced before. It's not just a climax. It's a release that seems to ripple through her whole body, leaving her fulfilled and deeply satisfied. For a man, witnessing this can be life-changing, because it shows you that even in your 60s or 70s, you are capable of giving a kind of pleasure that rivals, and often surpasses, what younger men can provide. It's about patience, wisdom, and devotion. Gentlemen, this is the urologist's trick. Begin with the clitoris, awaken her body, then guide her into the deeper zone of the G-spot once she is ready. Respect the sequence, and you will see intimacy transform before your eyes. But before we move further, I need to address a damaging belief that has held men back for generations: the idea that penetration alone is enough to bring her to climax. This myth has done more harm than almost any other, and it's time we set the record straight. 4. Myth number 1. Penetration alone is enough. For as long as most of us can remember, men have been told a story about sex that simply isn't true. The story goes like this: if you can achieve and maintain penetration, if you can last long enough and perform strongly enough, then your partner will naturally reach orgasm. Many of us grew up believing this idea, and it was reinforced in movies, in locker room conversations, even in cultural myths about what makes a man good in bed. But let me be honest with you as a doctor who has listened to thousands of women over the years. Penetration alone, no matter how vigorous, is not enough for the vast majority of women. In fact, studies show that around 80% of women do not climax through vaginal intercourse alone. 80%, that is nearly every woman you know. When I first share this fact with men, I often see shock on their faces. Some look down in silence, realizing for the first time that their wives' lack of response wasn't due to age or lack of attraction, but simply because of anatomy. The vaginal canal, especially the deeper 2/3, has very few nerve endings. It is designed primarily for childbirth, not for sensation. Yes, some penetration positions can provide indirect stimulation of the clitoris, but it is rarely enough. What this means is that if your partner has not been reaching orgasm from intercourse alone, it is not her fault, and it is not yours either. It is simply biology. I remember counseling a man in his late 60s who carried a heavy burden of guilt. He said, "Doctor, I feel like I've failed her. All these years, she's never seemed to enjoy intercourse the way I hoped she would." His wife sat beside him, holding his hand, and gently said, "It's not you, it's just that it never quite did it for me." That moment was heartbreaking, but it was also liberating. Because once the myth was broken, they were free to explore what really worked, and for them, that meant prioritizing clitoral stimulation before and during intercourse, something they had never openly discussed before. Within weeks, their intimacy felt new again, even after 40 years of marriage. Gentlemen, this is why it is so important to let go of old beliefs. If you have been quietly wondering why she doesn't climax during sex, or why she sometimes seems distracted, it may have nothing to do with your effort. The truth is, women need a different path to orgasm than men. While men can often climax from penetration alone, women rely far more on external stimulation, particularly of the clitoris, to reach that peak. Once you understand this, the pressure lifts. You no longer have to wonder if you're doing something wrong, you simply adjust your approach to match her anatomy. And let me tell you something powerful. When a man in his 60s or 70s takes the time to learn this truth and to apply it, his partner often looks at him with a new kind of admiration. Because it's not about brute force, it's about wisdom, patience, and generosity. That's the beauty of being older. You have the maturity to listen, to learn, and to adapt. And those qualities are what make you an extraordinary lover. But there's another myth that runs just as deep, one that has haunted men for generations and caused endless anxiety in the bedroom. It is the belief that size, specifically the length of the penis, is the ultimate measure of a man's ability to please his partner. I can tell you with certainty, as both a doctor and a man who has studied this for decades, that this idea is not only false, but deeply misleading. And understanding why can free you from one of the most unnecessary pressures men have ever carried. 5. Myth number 2, size, length, determines satisfaction. For generations, men have carried the heavy weight of comparison. It starts young, in locker rooms and whispered conversations, and it follows many of us well into old age. The belief that the longer a man's penis is, the more pleasure he can give a woman has been burned into our minds. Magazines, movies, even jokes among friends have all reinforced this false standard. And yet, as a physician who has dedicated his life to men's health and intimacy, I can tell you with complete certainty, length does not determine a woman's satisfaction. In fact, an obsession with length has caused more harm than good, leaving men anxious and women often uncomfortable. Here's the reality that few people talk about. The areas of the vagina that are most sensitive to pleasure are located within the first 3 to 4 inches. The clitoris, which we have already discussed, sits externally but extends internally into this region. The G-spot, that mysterious zone we just explored, also lies just a couple of inches in. These areas respond to pressure, touch, and fullness. Beyond that, deeper into the vaginal canal, there are far fewer nerve endings. It is not designed for sensation in the way men assume. That's why longer penetration often misses the true sources of pleasure entirely. I have spoken with many women who admitted, often with a shy smile, that length never mattered much to them. What they cared about was connection, rhythm, and the way their partner paid attention to their body. In some cases, women even described long penises as uncomfortable or painful, especially when the cervix at the back of the vaginal canal was struck repeatedly. One woman told me, "It felt like cramping, not pleasure. I didn't know how to explain that to him without hurting his pride." Gentlemen, this is what happens when men are taught to chase the wrong goal. Instead of focusing on what actually creates joy, they measure themselves against an unrealistic and unnecessary standard. I remember a patient, a retired military officer in his 70s, who sat in my office with tears in his eyes. For decades, he had worried that he wasn't big enough. He confessed that he sometimes avoided intimacy because of that fear. When I explained to him that length was not the key, that most women's most sensitive areas were well within reach, he leaned back in his chair and whispered, "So all these years, I didn't have to feel ashamed?" That realization lifted a burden he had carried for most of his life. A month later, he returned with his wife, who held his hand and said, "Doctor, for the first time in years, he looked at me with confidence again." It wasn't size that changed their intimacy, it was knowledge. Gentlemen, let me be clear. Your worth as a man, your ability to give pleasure, has nothing to do with being long. The truth is, what matters more is presence, patience, and technique. It's the way you listen to her, the way you use your hands, your lips, your words, and yes, your body, but with wisdom instead of insecurity. And the good news is that there is something far more important than length, something that actually enhances a woman's experience during penetration and leaves her feeling full, stimulated, and deeply satisfied. That something is girth, the thickness of the penis, and more importantly, how you combine it with external stimulation. This is the real secret that has been ignored while the world focused on size, and once you understand it, you'll see why so many women care little about length and far more about how a man makes them feel. So let's talk now about the truth of girth and why it matters more than the numbers men have spent a lifetime worrying about. 6. The truth. Girth and technique matter more. When men finally free themselves from the myth of length, another truth comes into focus, and it often feels like a revelation. What really matters to a woman's pleasure is not how far you can reach, but how completely you can fill and stimulate her most sensitive areas. This is where girth, the thickness of the penis, plays a far more important role than length ever could. And it is not just about physical size, it is about how girth, combined with proper technique and attentiveness, can create sensations that truly satisfy her in ways penetration alone never could. The vaginal walls, especially in that lower third where most of the nerve endings are, respond to pressure and friction. A thicker penis provides more contact with those walls, and more importantly, more consistent stimulation of the G-spot. Many women describe girth as creating a feeling of fullness, of being completely embraced from the inside. It's not about hitting the cervix at the back. It's about pressing into those nerve-rich areas at the front and sides, the places that actually matter. When combined with clitoral stimulation from the outside, this creates a dual sensation that overwhelms her in the best possible way. Over the years, I've had many women confide that girth gave them far more pleasure than length. One woman explained it to me this way. "It's like the difference between being poked and being held. One is distracting, the other makes me melt." That image stuck with me because it highlights something so many men never understand. Your partner doesn't want to be poked endlessly. She wants to feel surrounded, enveloped, and cared for. That is what girth, used with tenderness and skill, can provide. But girth alone is not the magic answer either. I have seen men who relied solely on their natural size, assuming that being thicker meant they didn't need to pay attention to anything else. That approach leads to disappointment because technique is just as critical. Think of girth as a tool. It is powerful, but only if you know how to use it. Without clitoral stimulation, without rhythm, without the patience to build arousal, even the thickest presence will fall flat. What women crave is not simply physical fullness, but the combination of fullness and arousal, inside and outside at the same time. When you bring those elements together, that is when her body responds with intensity you may never have seen before. I recall a man in his mid-60s who came to me worried because he believed he wasn't enough for his wife. He had carried insecurities about his size for decades, though in truth he had average girth. I explained to him that with the right focus, especially learning how to combine steady penetration with external clitoral touch, he could give her everything she needed. He left my office skeptical, but 2 months later, he came back smiling. "Doctor," he said, "it wasn't me that was lacking. It was my knowledge. Once I stopped worrying about what I wasn't and started paying attention to what I could do, she responded in ways I'd never seen." That moment reminded me yet again that pleasure is not about numbers, it's about presence. Gentlemen, remember this. Girth gives you the ability to create meaningful contact, but technique transforms that contact into lasting pleasure. A steady rhythm, an awareness of her body's signals, and the humility to focus on her needs are the qualities that separate an average lover from a great one. And here's the best part. None of this depends on being young. In fact, men over 60 often have the patience, the wisdom, and the generosity that younger men lack. When you use girth with skill, combined with the knowledge of her anatomy, you show her that intimacy with you is not only satisfying but unforgettable. But there is still one final truth. One element that surpasses all technique and all anatomy. It is the most powerful organ of all, and it is not found below the waist. If you truly want to understand how to give lasting joy and connection, you must look beyond the physical body and into something even more important. Let's talk now about the brain. 7. The most important organ. The brain. After all the discussion of anatomy, of clitoral stimulation, of the G-spot, of girth and technique, I want to bring you to the most important truth of all. The greatest sexual organ is not the clitoris, not the vagina, not even the penis. The most powerful organ in intimacy is the brain. This is something I've seen time and again in my patients, in couples who have been together for decades. When the brain feels safe, connected, and cared for, the body can surrender to pleasure. When the brain feels anxious, distracted, or unappreciated, no amount of physical technique will ever be enough. You see, intimacy is not just about mechanics. It is about emotion, trust, and communication. A woman who feels seen, who feels cherished, is far more likely to let her guard down and allow herself to experience pleasure fully. I've had women tell me, "Doctor, I never had an orgasm until my partner started really listening to me, not just to my body, but to my words." That simple shift, treating sex not as a performance but as a dialogue, can change everything. For older men especially, this is an advantage. You have lived, you have loved, you have experienced the ups and downs of life. You know what it means to be patient, to listen, to value another person. Those qualities are the true foundations of great intimacy. Think about it this way. When you ask her what she likes, when you pause to notice her breathing, when you let her know that her pleasure matters more to you than your pride, you are speaking directly to her brain. You are telling her, you are safe, you are desired, you are understood. And once she feels that, the rest follows naturally. Orgasms become easier, pleasure flows more freely, and the connection between you grows stronger. I remember a man in his early 70s who came to me, frustrated because he felt he could no longer satisfy his wife. He still loved her deeply, but he was worried that aging had taken away his ability to give her joy. What he didn't realize was that his wife wasn't longing for longer erections or extraordinary stamina. She wanted him to hold her, to talk to her, to focus on her needs without rushing. When he learned to combine technique with tenderness, when he began to honor her emotions as much as her body, everything changed. She blossomed, and he rediscovered his confidence. That is the power of the brain in intimacy. So as we close, remember this. Your body matters, but your heart and your mind matter more. Pleasure is not about being the strongest or the longest. It is about being the most attentive, the most caring, the most present. At this stage of life, you have an opportunity younger men often miss. You can bring not just passion, but wisdom. And when you use that wisdom to create a safe, loving space, you unlock a level of intimacy that is deeper, richer, and more fulfilling than anything you may have experienced before. That, gentlemen, is the real secret. It is not just about orgasm, it is about connection, and it is never too late to create it.